Hey, welcome or welcome back to the stash.
Oh. What day is it? Oh. Spider-Man Day. I swear I used to be excited for these.
So our story begins with Spider-Man losing his touch with reality. He bursts out of the building, all the while an endless amount of his deadly foes chase after him. He tries his best to fight them all off, but during this, in his head, he recounts a certain dream that plagues his mind as well as memories of his now distant childhood. Amidst all the chaos he's causing, we see glimpses of what's real, and to the people of New York City, Spider-Man right now is a lost man thrashing. But then suddenly, he's transported to his new workplace. Peter can't believe what's going on. He tries his best to keep up, from making excuses to tagging along with his old friend, but then it all gets to be too much. Peter sits and talks to Brian. They even reminisce on the time Peter covered for him way back when. However, as Peter remembers old times, he's without warning taken to yet another place, this time on top of Rand Enterprises, and behind him is the Green Goblin. He strikes at the Goblin, yet he catches the punch with ease. But as Peter looks back at his green foe, he's now without disguise, just simply Norman Osborn. However, Norman tells Peter he's taking the rest of the day off. Meanwhile, the mysterious figure from last issue reports back to the Hobgoblin, who is very disappointed at the fact that Spider-Man is still alive, and so he warns them to get the job done loudly, or don't come back. We return with Peter to see that he's in the care of Norman Osborn. It turns out he was severely poisoned. His body can eventually flush the toxin out, but until then his mind is a time bomb. He must stay and rest, or else he'll damage his reputation even more. Norman easily figures it out that it was a trap, and there's even a small hint to his familiar sinister nature. However, Peter, being as stubborn as ever when it comes to being Spider-Man, decides to go check up on the Rhino. Next stop, Ravencroft. His mind is still very fragile, but he has a job to do. Inside, he meets with Shay, who is pretty concerned about Spider-Man's current mental state. But her words fall on deaf ears as Peter's mind slowly drifts back to his childhood, with a memory showing him disrespecting his Aunt May and Uncle Ben before promptly running away. The memory begins to fade and shatter with the persistence of Shay. Peter realizes how much of a bad idea this entire thing was, but before he can leave, a haunting scream can be heard coming from the Rhino's room, and so Spider-Man wastes absolutely no time swinging over. But once arrived, he's met with a massacre. Several guards lie dead on the ground, and if Spidey doesn't hurry up, the Rhino will soon be joining the deceased. Okay, now, shockingly, there's actually quite a few things I liked about this issue. This was, without a doubt, the best issue of The Amazing Spider-Man we've had in years. It's not saying much, but it's still worth the note. I felt there was actual effort here, real character work, and some, dare I say, growth within said characters. But, and there's always a but when it comes to modern ASM, it's still not without its fair share of faults. It's a step in the right direction, sure, but that doesn't mean we're completely out of the woods yet. Firstly, I've got to talk about the art, because I loved it. Pepe Larraz has absolutely been killing it with the artwork in these last two issues. His style, especially when it comes to drawing Spider-Man, is just incredible. There's this fluidity in the way that Spidey moves that feels so natural, like he's actually in motion and not just posed for a cool shot. The swinging panels in particular almost leap off the page. I wish there was more. There's so much energy and momentum in every frame that it feels like Spider-Man could just swing right past your face. And what I really appreciate is that Larraz makes Spider-Man feel expressive, but in a way that still captures a more mature Peter Parker. He's not overly exaggerated, and his body language actually reflects where Peter is at this point in his life. A bit more built, a bit more grounded, but still that same quick, agile hero we know. Now, I will say that sometimes his Peter Parker design can lead into that sort of generic look, how the previous issue was extremely guilty of that. But you know the one, clean cut, forgettable, could be anyone face. The typical modern Peter Parker who just doesn't look like Peter Parker at all. But I will say, honestly, that only popped up once or twice for me in this issue. The rest of the time, I really liked the way he looked. There was enough character in his expression and physicality to make Peter stand out, which is something a lot of artists struggle to nail consistently. And I'll even go a step further. After just 2 issues, Pepe Larraz is easily one of my favorite recent artists on Amazing Spider-Man. Besides someone like Patrick Gleason, and maybe McGuinness to a certain degree, I think he's the only one in recent memory who's brought this much life and personality to both Spider-Man, his villains, and Peter Parker. Now when it comes to the story, it definitely suffers from a lot of the same Brand New Day era annoyances. It's not nearly as lazy or hollow as issue 1. That honestly felt like an insult as a reader, but the baggage is still there. That said, this issue actually feels like Joe Kelly is starting to tell a story he wants to tell, rather than just ticking off Nick Lowe's editorial boxes. And that alone makes a huge difference. For the first time in a while, I actually started to get a sense of his voice for Spider-Man, especially with the whole sand dream narration. I genuinely liked that sequence. It wasn't perfect, sure, but maybe it could have been delivered a little bit more smoothly, but it still served its purpose really well. It gave us a glimpse into Peter's inner thoughts in a way that felt personal and reflective, and that sort of introspective nature has been severely lacking in Amazing Spider-Man comics lately. So even if it wasn't a home run, it was still incredibly refreshing to see something like that included, and I hope it continues throughout this entire run. As for the flashbacks though, they were fine. I'm glad we're finally getting some moments that hint at Peter being a bit more rebellious, even if it's just in his youth, but did it have to be in the most boring way possible? Like, he swore and stole a beer, and disrespected his guardians. Is that it? It just felt like the safest, most surface level version of rebellion they could have gone with. And then there's the classic, "You're not my parents" thing directed at Uncle Ben and Aunt May. In the context of the story, it felt, I don't know, maybe too over the top. Like the rebellious side of Peter went from one extreme to the other randomly. I get it, like he's a kid acting out, but that line has been used so many times now, I think it's lost the impact and weight it used to carry when he'd say that. It became the default, and it kind of undermines what could have been a much deeper, more specific look at Peter's struggles as a teenager or a kid. What I'm really trying to say though is they had an opportunity to show us something real, something that dug further into Peter's past, but instead they played it safe. And that's been the biggest theme with this run overall. Everything feels like it's operating within a comfort zone. Even when it flirts with interesting ideas, it rarely pushes far enough to make them stick. And look, I get it. The Spidey office clearly needs this run to be as safe as humanly possible after the disaster that was the last volume. They're in their own stubborn form of damage control, and it shows. You can see it in the structure, the tone, the repeated Brand New Day story beats, even the character dynamics. That cautious approach is especially clear when it comes to Peter and Shay. With each new issue, their relationship is being loudly dissolved bit by bit, and it's pretty obvious what they're doing. We have ourselves another shallow Brand New Day love interest who'll soon be forgotten about. But hey, maybe this means that Peter and MJ can finally get back to... But you know what? I think we need a safe by-the-books run right now. We need something that doesn't try to spit in our faces or shatter years of character development every 5 seconds like the previous volume. If Marvel's still not going to undo One More Day anytime soon, and let's be real, they probably won't, then the least they can do is give us something that's actually like bearable to read. A run that respects the characters, keeps things steady, and maybe even starts to rebuild some trust with the fans. It's a very big wish for me to have, I know, but at this point, it's all we as Spidey fans have left. And also, and maybe this is just my bias talking because I love the 80s Spider-Man comics, but I'm really into how Hobgoblin is being set up as the central villain of this run. There's something about seeing Roderick Kingsley back in the mix that just hits the right spot. The character's always had so much potential, but he's been kind of pushed aside or misused severely over the years. So if this run can give me one thing, I'm hoping it's that Hobgoblin finally gets the respect he deserves, to put him back on the map, to remind people why he was such a major threat during one of Spidey's most iconic eras. Now, as for the other villain, Itsy Bitsy, I've got mixed feelings. That reveal at the end of the issue just felt, I don't know, kind of underwhelming. It wasn't awful or anything, but it didn't hit with the impact I wanted to or expected it to have. Maybe that's just because she's at the bottom of the barrel for Spider-Man foes, or maybe it's how she was built up, but it didn't really leave me looking forward to the next issue in that sort of sense. That said though, I am willing to give it a chance. If Joe Kelly has something interesting planned for her, cool, I'll roll with it. At least it's not another Kindred situation, or at least I hope it's not with the new childhood friend. We don't need another convoluted, dragged out mystery villain arc that collapses under its own weight. Keep it tight, keep it focused, and maybe there's potential there. So all in all, this issue of Amazing Spider-Man surprised me in the best way possible. It's not perfect by any means, there are still lingering problems baked into the DNA of this run, and some creative decisions that feel more like Marvel playing it safe than pushing things forward. But at the same time, this issue actually gave me something I haven't felt with this book in a very long time. Some actual enjoyment. Pepe Larraz's art is phenomenal. It easily elevates the story and gives Spider-Man the energy, maturity, and weight he's been sorely missing. Joe Kelly's writing, while still rough in some spots, finally starts to show some signs of personality, especially in the introspective narration and his take on Peter's mental state. It's not actively trying to ruin or reinvent the character, and maybe that's a thing that this run sorely needs after the mess of the last volume. Sometimes the best thing you can do is go back to basics and just focus on trying to tell a good Spider-Man story. Sure, the flashbacks could have gone deeper. The rebellious Peter angle played it a little too much like what I'd imagine Nick Lowe did as a kid to piss his parents off, and the itsy bitsy reveal didn't land with the kind of punch it was clearly aiming for. But between that and the promising setup for Hobgoblin, who I'm really hoping gets a proper spotlight here, there's a foundation being laid. A foundation that, if handled right, could lead to something actually worth reading. And maybe that's where this run succeeds most right now. It feels like the first time in ages where reading this title didn't leave me in a state of feeling jaded. And in a time where all we get is the worst Amazing Spider-Man comics possible, I'll take whatever small win I can get.